"Don't marry her, sir." The clear, ringing cry of a little girl no older than 4 rose suddenly through the grand hall of the Moretti estate, and every guest turned their head at once. The daughter of the housekeeper ran straight toward the Mafia Boss, her eyes red with worry. She stopped directly in front of the groom, breathing hard, and said through the catch in her small voice, "Please don't marry her. She is betraying you." The whole hall fell silent. The bride went pale in an instant, and every guest assumed the child was only making up a story to ruin the wedding. But when the Mafia Boss calmly asked her why she would dare to say such a thing, the innocent answer that followed, along with the truths that came after it, made him realize that the woman he was about to marry might be hiding a dark secret. It was also the moment that opened the door to a conspiracy that had been quietly built for years inside the very heart of the Moretti family. Alessandro Moretti did not straighten right away. He stayed there in the middle of the aisle, one knee bent, his tailored black jacket folding neatly at the crease, and he looked at the little girl the way a man looks at something he has been waiting a long time to understand. He was 42 years old. He ran the most feared crime family on the eastern seaboard, and in the marble hall of the Moretti estate, 200 guests watched him kneel in front of a housekeeper's daughter, and not one of them dared to breathe too loudly. His voice, when it came, was low and steady. "What is your name?" "Emma. Emma. What did you see?" The little girl's fingers closed tighter around the small silver cross that hung on her chest. Her voice trembled, but her words did not. "Many nights," she said. Many nights when she had come down to the kitchen for water, she had seen the lady in the white dress slip out into the back garden. A man had been waiting there, a tall man in a long coat with the hood pulled low over his face. Sometimes the lady cried, sometimes the man handed her an envelope, and the lady put it inside her coat and did not tell anyone. Emma had watched from behind the pantry door, small and quiet, and she had not been sure what any of it meant until she heard the word wedding. Then, Sophia was there. She came running through the parted crowd, her housekeeper's uniform still smelling of morning bread, and she dropped to her knees on the marble beside her daughter. She began to apologize before she had even lifted her head. 12 years she had served the Moretti family. 12 years she had walked these hallways in silence, and now her child stood at the altar of the boss's wedding, undoing everything. Vanessa did not move at first. She only shook her head, over and over, and the tears began to run down her cheeks in silent, uneven lines. "I did not," she whispered. "I did not. I did not. I did not." The guests began to murmur. A senator's wife pressed her jeweled hand against her throat. 2 old capos in the 3rd row exchanged a look that said very little and meant a great deal. Luca, who had stood at Alessandro's left shoulder for 18 years, stepped forward. His voice was quiet, meant only for his boss. "Signore, let me take the woman and the child out. Quickly, we can continue." Alessandro rose to his full height. He lifted one hand, palm open, and the whole hall went still. Then he turned to the priest at the altar, and the sentence he spoke silenced every whisper in the room. "Suspend the ceremony." He reached for Vanessa's hand. Her fingers were cold. He drew her close, brushed his lips against her forehead the way a husband might, and when he spoke into her ear, his voice was calm as water and cold as steel. "I believe you, but I need to know the truth." Vanessa nodded. Her lips had gone completely white. No one in that marble hall knew what his father had told him the day he was brought into this world at 18. A warning ignored is a grave already dug. Alessandro Moretti had lived to 42 only because he had never once, in 24 years, dismissed a single thing that felt wrong. He led Vanessa toward the grand staircase, toward the 3rd-floor study, and issued his order to Luca, in a voice too low for any guest to hear. "Investigate. Quietly. No capo was to know. No soldier was to know. Above all, Ryan was not to know." In the crowd drifting toward the front doors, no one noticed a man in a gray suit slip out early the right hand of Alessandro Moretti, the consigliere the boss had trusted for 15 years, walking calmly into the afternoon sun. Sophia did not slow down until she had pulled Emma through the servants' corridor behind the kitchen, past the pantry, past the linen closet, past every doorway where someone might still be listening. She turned the brass key in the lock of the small staff room, and only then let herself lean against the wooden door with her whole weight. Her breath came in short, uneven pulls. The smell of morning bread was still on her uniform. It seemed obscene now, as though she had brought the ordinary world into a room that no longer contained it. Emma stood in the middle of the small room, hands folded in front of her, waiting. She looked, in that moment, older than 4. Sophia crossed to her and knelt. Her fingers trembled as she reached up to untie the red ribbon in her daughter's hair. She could not seem to make the loop come apart. She tried 3 times before Emma quietly reached up and finished it for her. "Tell me again," Sophia whispered. "Every night, from the beginning." And Emma told her, calmly, without embellishment, the way children tell things when they have not yet learned how to lie. 4 different nights over the last 3 weeks. The first, a Tuesday, when the moon was full and she had wanted a cup of water. The second, a Friday, when she had heard the back door click and had gone to see because she thought it was a cat. The third, a Sunday, after Sophia had already fallen asleep. The fourth, only 2 nights ago, on the eve of the wedding rehearsal, when the lady in the white dress had cried into her hands, and the tall man in the long coat had waited beside her without touching her, as though touching her was not part of what he had come for. Sophia went cold from the inside outward. She understood what Emma was, still too small to understand. In this world, 1 wrong sentence could bury an entire family. Housekeepers had disappeared in this city for less. She pulled Emma against her chest, tightly, and pressed her lips to the top of her daughter's head. "Listen to me, my love. You only tell Signor Moretti, only him, no one else, not the guards, not the cooks, not the drivers, not Uncle Ryan. Do you understand me? Especially not Uncle Ryan." Emma nodded against her collarbone. Her small fingers closed once more around the silver cross at her throat, the way a soldier grips a rosary before a battle. 3 floors above them, in the 3rd-floor study, Vanessa was on her knees on the Persian rug. She was pleading, she was swearing, over and over, that she had never once betrayed him. Alessandro lifted her by the elbows and set her gently in the leather armchair beside his desk. He poured a glass of water. He offered her his handkerchief, folded in the same neat square his mother had once folded them into 40 years earlier. He did not shout. He did not accuse. "I am not condemning you," he said. "I only need time. Until then, you will stay here, in our rooms. No one will disturb you." Vanessa nodded. She did not dare speak. She did not dare tell him that her brother Marco, 19 years old, had disappeared 3 weeks ago. That every meeting in the back garden was the delivery of an order from the man who was holding him. That a single sentence out of her mouth would kill her brother inside of a few minutes. Her right hand closed around the small silver pocket watch hidden in the folded silk of her wedding dress, the last object left in the world that had ever belonged to her family, and she held it there against her ribs as though it were a heart still beating. Alessandro stepped out and turned the key in the lock behind him. In the Moretti estate, a locked door was not confinement. It was protection. Down in the servants' corridor, outside Sophia's room, a pair of footsteps paused for exactly 1 second in front of the door and then walked quietly on. The polished black leather of Ryan's shoes caught the corridor light as he passed the last turning of the hall and stopped in front of the door of the estate's security office, where every camera feed in the Moretti estate was stored. The first night was the longest one Alessandro Moretti had lived in 20 years. He lay on his side of the enormous bed in the master suite, the sheets pulled just to his ribs, and he did not sleep. The moon came through the tall windows in a pale, uneven wash, laying itself across the carpet, across the foot of the bed, across the curve of Vanessa's shoulder, where she had finally surrendered to exhaustion. Her breathing was slow. Her lashes rested against her cheeks in that soft, defenseless way he had once told her was the reason he had first known he would marry her. He watched her. For the first time in 2 years, he watched her the way a man watches a room he has walked into 100 times and suddenly no longer recognizes. He noticed the way her hand had drifted, even in sleep, toward the object on the nightstand. He noticed the way her body tensed, only slightly, only for a heartbeat, whenever the phone on the far side of the room vibrated in its charger. He noticed that she had never once, in 24 months, let him see her unlock a screen. She always turned it away, laughing, as though it were a small vanity. He noticed the silver pocket watch beside the lamp. He had seen it 100 times. He had never asked whose it was. He lifted it now. He lifted it slowly, without a sound, and turned it over in the moonlight so that the engraving on the back caught the pale light. Per sempre fratelli, not for eternal love, not the language of a lover, the language of a brother. He set the watch back where it had been, aligned to the exact angle he had found it, and got up without disturbing a single fold of the sheet. He went down to his study on the 2nd floor. He did not turn on the overhead lamp. He turned on only the small green banker's light on the desk. He opened his laptop and logged into the internal family system, the same system Ryan had designed and installed for him 7 years earlier. He typed 2 words: Vanessa Hale, family. The result was brief. Parents deceased in a highway accident when she was 16. No siblings recorded. He frowned. He typed again: Vanessa Hale, Italy. No records. She had never crossed the ocean. She had never even applied for a passport with a European stamp, and she did not speak Italian. Months earlier, at a private dinner, he had tested her with 3 sentences in his mother tongue, and she had only laughed and shaken her head and asked him what he had said. He remembered the softness of her laugh. It had been the laugh of a woman without secrets. So whose watch was it? Whose brother? He drummed his fingers, once, twice, against the walnut edge of the desk. He had 2 paths. He could go upstairs and place the watch in her palm and ask her, directly, and see what came out of her mouth. Or he could dig. In his world, direct questions killed more truths than they preserved. He chose the second path. He picked up the one-line burner and dialed a number he had memorized before he had learned how to shave. Diego answered on the second ring. Alessandro spoke low and briefly. A deep background on Vanessa Hale, every number she had called in the last 3 months. Every number that had called her, especially any that were untraceable. Diego did not ask why. He only said, "By dawn, signore." 3 floors below the study, in the sub-basement of the Moretti estate, a level accessible only to Alessandro, to Ryan, and to 3 of the oldest capos of the family. Marco Hale was tied to a metal chair in a cold, windowless room, exactly 47 meters, in a straight line, from the desk where the boss had just given the order to find him. Morning came to the Moretti estate in a thin, unsentimental light. The garden that had held 200 wedding chairs the day before was now bare of them, only the marble aisle remaining, wet with dew, an aisle that led to nothing. In the security office at the far end of the ground floor, Luca closed the door behind Alessandro and clicked the first monitor to life. "I did what you asked, signore. Overnight, only me. No one else has seen this." Alessandro said nothing. He only stepped closer to the screen. The first file was garden footage. 3 nights in the past week, the rear camera above the servants' gate had recorded the same scene. A woman in a dark coat crossed the flagstones from the house. A tall man in a long coat waited at the outer gate, his face hidden by the low pull of a hood. He handed her a plain envelope. She took it. She slid it inside the fold of her coat. Neither of them touched. Neither of them lingered. On the second night, she wept briefly and turned her face away. On the third night, she did not weep at all. Alessandro's jaw did not move. His eyes did not blink. The second file was a bank record. $250,000 had been drawn from a Moretti holding account and moved to an anonymous shell in the Cayman Islands. The authorization stamp carried a biometric confirmation. The fingerprint on file, cross-checked from the estate's own security system, was Vanessa Hale's. The third file was a message thread, partially deleted, recovered from a secondary handset registered to a name he had never heard. "He will believe me. He always believes me." Luca stood beside him and waited. He did not speak. He knew when not to. In the silence, the overhead light hummed at the edge of hearing. Alessandro looked at the screen for a very long time. He thought of his father in the last week of his life, in the private wing of Mount Sinai, thinner than a man had any right to be, sitting up against the pillows with the calm of someone who had made peace with everything except foolishness. "Evidence that arrives clean," his father had said, "is evidence that has been washed. The real enemy leaves his mark 3 layers deep." He did not let any of this reach his face. He said only, and his voice was cold, "Check who accessed the rear garden camera system on those 3 nights. Luca hesitated. He turned to the terminal and typed. A few seconds passed. He looked up, and his mouth pulled at one corner in that reluctant way it did when a truth was not the truth a man wanted to say aloud. "Signor, the only person with the highest tier code, other than yourself, is Ryan. But Ryan has full access to every system in the house. His presence in the security office is not, in itself, unusual." Alessandro nodded, keeping his expression perfectly neutral. He knew Luca did not yet suspect Ryan. He also knew this was not the hour to plant that seed. If Ryan sensed suspicion, Ryan would move first. "Print everything," he said. "Bring it to my study in 2 hours. Speak to no one." He left the security office and walked directly to his study. Diego was already there, waiting in one of the chairs, a slim folder on his knee. He rose when Alessandro entered. "No anonymous number yet, signore. But her second phone, the one activated only 3 weeks ago, has received calls from a line using military-grade anti-trace technology." Meaning 3 kinds of people use those numbers: government intelligence, terrorists, and the bosses of rival families. Alessandro's hand closed on the arm of the chair until the leather creaked. On the 3rd floor above him, Vanessa stood at her window, and through the gauze curtain she watched a familiar black car slip through the wrought iron gates of the estate. It was Ryan's car. He was leaving, without word. At 8 in the morning, Alessandro sent for her at 11 in the morning. Vanessa came down the grand staircase with Luca one step behind her. She had not changed out of the soft ivory dress she had worn since the ceremony had been suspended. She had not slept. Her hair had been brushed, but only once, by her own trembling hands. When she stepped into the study, the light through the tall windows fell across the 3 documents laid neatly on the walnut desk, and she saw them before she saw him. The photograph of the meeting at the servants' gate, the bank record from the Cayman transfer, the recovered message thread, printed in a small, merciless font on plain white paper. She looked down. Her face went pale in layers, one shade at a time, the way a flame dies in an old oil lamp. She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Alessandro waited. He did not rush her. He sat behind the desk with both hands flat against the wood, the way his father used to sit when he was deciding whether a man would leave a room or not. His voice, when it came, was very low. "One sentence, Vanessa. That is all I need. One sentence that explains any of this. And I can still believe you." She looked at him. Her eyes were full of water. Her lower lip trembled and would not stop. She opened her mouth 3 times, and 3 times she closed it, because she knew. She knew that the moment Marco's name left her mouth, it would reach Ryan within minutes. Ryan had ears in every wing of this house. Ryan had ears in the kitchen. Ryan had ears among the drivers. Ryan had ears. God help her. Perhaps in this very study. Her brother would be dead in the time it took her to finish a single confession. She could only say what she had already said. "I have not betrayed you. I am begging you. Believe me one more time." Alessandro's hands closed around the arms of the chair until the knuckles went white beneath the skin. He looked at the 3 documents. He looked at her. He said, in the same low voice, "I told you I believed you, but I cannot believe these 3 things while you tell me nothing." Vanessa broke. She folded forward against the edge of the desk and wept without shape, without dignity, without the kind of grief a woman is permitted to wear in public. Luca stood at the wall. He did not look away. His face carried no anger, only a quiet and unmistakable disappointment. To a man like Luca, silence in the face of evidence was itself a confession. He had been in this world since he was 18. He had seen this exact shape of guilt before, and he had rarely been wrong. Alessandro rose from the chair. He turned his back to her. He spoke to Luca without looking at either of them. "Take her back to her rooms. Post 2 guards at the door. No one enters. Not the maids. Not the florist. Not the family priest. Every meal comes from my private cook. On my order. On a tray I have seen." Luca inclined his head. Vanessa lifted her tear-swollen face. "You are locking me up?" she whispered. Alessandro did not turn around. "I am protecting you." The sentence silenced her completely. She let Luca lead her out. The door closed with a soft, expensive click. Alessandro stood alone, with one hand flat against the frame of the window. He looked out across the garden, where the wedding arch had been half dismantled and the last white rose petals lay scattered across the flagstones like an unfinished argument. He had never trusted evidence more than instinct, and this time, instinct told him something worse than betrayal. Somebody was trying, with too much care, to build him a story, and that somebody was standing very close. 3 floors below, in the sub-basement no one was allowed to enter, Marco Hale was drinking the last glass of water of his day, a glass that tonight would carry something more than water in it. They walked her back up to the 3rd floor without a word. Luca opened the door of the master bedroom, waited for her to step inside, and closed it behind her. She heard the soft, measured click of the lock. She heard the security bolts on the windows engage one by one. She heard, through the wall, the low voices of 2 men taking up their positions in the hallway. She did not know their names. She only knew what she had already begun to suspect. Both of them had been hired 3 months earlier. Both of them had been vetted by Ryan. She stood in the middle of the room for a long time. Then she slid down the side of the bed and sat on the carpet with her back against the mattress, the way she had sat as a girl in the days after her parents had died. She reached into the folded silk of her wedding dress and drew out the small silver pocket watch. She held it in her palm. She opened the lid. Inside was a photograph the size of her thumb. 4 faces, 2 children, 2 parents. A summer afternoon at a rented cottage on Long Island in the year she had turned 16. It was the last photograph the 4 of them had ever appeared in together. She began, in the silence of the locked room, to tell the whole story back to herself, not aloud. She did not trust the walls. She told it to herself the way one tells a rosary, 1 bead at a time, because if she stopped moving her mind she was afraid it would break. After the accident there had been only the 2 of them. Their parents had left a small savings account and a large medical debt. She had been 16. Marco had been 9. She had waited tables during the day and taken evening classes at a community college 3 trains away. Twice, when the rent had come due and there had been no other way, she had cut off her hair and sold it. Once, in a hard winter, she had walked into a plasma center and had come out with money for Marco's science books. She had raised him on borrowed sleep and hidden hunger. He had grown up gentle. He had grown up kind. He had opened his acceptance letter to Columbia University at their kitchen table 3 months ago and had cried into her shoulder because he had not believed it was real. 3 weeks ago, he had disappeared on his way back to his dormitory. At 4 in the morning, an anonymous number had called her second phone. The voice had been flat, quiet, almost bored. "You want your brother alive? Do exactly what we say. Tell no one, not even your boss." An image had followed the call. Marco, blindfolded, wrists tied, a fresh bruise across his throat. She had obeyed every instruction since, every meeting at the servants' gate, every envelope. The transfer she had authorized with her own fingerprint while she believed she was signing a charity release. She had obeyed because every new order came with a new photograph. Marco, thinner. Marco, still breathing. Marco, still alive at the time of that morning's timestamp. She pressed the little silver watch against her chest. She wept without sound. She thought of Alessandro, of the March night 6 months earlier when he had knelt in a spring rain on a stone path and had held out no diamond, only a plain gold band, and had said the sentence that had made her say yes. "I do not promise you an easy life. I promise you I will stand with you inside every hard one." The first hard thing had come, and she was about to lose him inside it. She closed her hand around the watch until the metal cut a small red mark into her palm. She swore, in the dark, that if she had to die to do it, she would save her brother and she would keep Alessandro alive. In the hallway, one of the 2 guards checked his wristwatch. At 3 o'clock in the morning, precisely, he would receive a very short call from Ryan, and it would carry a very simple instruction. 3 floors below her, in the sub-basement of the Moretti estate, Marco Hale had already begun to slip under, his head lowered against his own shoulder, the sedative pulling him down through the last conscious layer of the day, while a man in latex gloves rolled a black canvas duffel bag open on the floor beside him and prepared to carry him out of the house before dawn. Midnight came to the Moretti estate, the way it had come to it for 100 years, softly, along the marble hallways, with the low ticking of the grandfather clock in the front hall counting out the hours the way a rosary counts prayers. Alessandro did not sleep. He sat in his study with the green banker's lamp turned to its lowest setting and the 3 documents laid out in a straight, careful row on the walnut desk. The photograph, the bank record, the message thread. He read them again. He read them the way he had learned to read contracts before he signed them, 1 clause at a time, feeling for the sentence that had been written to catch him. The more he read, the more he felt it. The photograph at the servants' gate had been captured from the one angle he knew Ryan was the only man in the house allowed to rotate. He had ordered that camera locked into a fixed frame himself 3 years ago, after a break-in scare. And only Ryan had been given override authority. The $250,000 transfer had gone through on 3 consecutive nights when Alessandro had been sitting in the Brooklyn warehouse across a small folding table from Ryan, going over shipping manifests until sunrise. Ryan had known, on every one of those nights, that his boss would not be reviewing bank statements and the message thread. He turned the printed page under the lamp. The recovery had taken a technician 15 minutes. In this world, a real operative did not leave text that surrendered in 15 minutes. A real operative left nothing at all. He remembered his father in the last month of his life. Cancer had taken almost all of him by then, but not the eyes and not the mind. His father had reached out one thin hand across the hospital blanket and had said, in the same voice he had used to teach him how to load a pistol at 16, "If the evidence is easy to find, my son, someone is walking you where they want you to go." The real enemy always buries his marks 3 layers deep. He thought of Ryan, 15 years at his right hand, the only man his father had trusted, on his deathbed, with the choosing of the loyal ones, the man who knew the combinations of the safes, the man who knew which senators had been paid and by whom, the man who knew the location of the 6 hidden rooms in this estate, including the sub-basement no household staff could reach, the man who had never married, the man who had never once brought a woman to dinner, the man who, in 2 years, had never sat close enough to Vanessa at any table to have exchanged more than pleasantries. Too invisible, too neutral, too perfectly placed just outside the frame of every family photograph. Alessandro reached into the drawer of his desk and drew out a small, plain, prepaid phone. He dialed Luca on a line. Ryan had no way of tapping. "Come up. Now. Alone." Luca arrived within 90 seconds. Alessandro did not offer him a chair. "Cross-check everything. Quietly. Nothing on the internal system. Nothing Ryan can see. And I want Antonio and Bruno on the door of the master bedroom at 4 in the morning. Rotate the 2 men who are there now off duty. Do not tell them why. Do not tell anyone why." Luca did not ask. Luca had walked into this life beside Alessandro's father when he was 18 years old. He knew the look on his boss's face when a betrayal had entered the house. He nodded once and left with 2 secret orders folded into his mind. At the moment, Luca closed the study door behind him. On the 3rd floor, one of the 2 guards outside Vanessa's room felt his phone vibrate against his ribs. He answered without lifting it to his ear. He listened for 4 seconds. He nodded to no one. Then he slipped his hand inside his jacket and quietly checked the fit of the suppressor screwed to the barrel of a compact pistol. The hands of his wristwatch stood at 3:15 in the morning. The same night, in the small staff room behind the kitchen, Emma could not sleep. She lay very still on the narrow cot beside her mother, listening to Sophia's tired, uneven breathing. The house had gone quiet in that particular way that great houses go quiet only after midnight, when the servants have retreated to the back wings and the guests have gone home and the marble no longer knows anyone is walking on it. Emma turned onto her side. She looked at the ceiling. She thought about the woman in the white dress. She had watched Vanessa's face when the 2 men led her up the staircase in the afternoon. She had watched from behind the doorframe while her mother pretended not to notice her looking. And Emma had seen something the grown-ups had not agreed on yet. Vanessa's eyes had not been the eyes of a guilty woman. They had been the eyes Emma had seen in the small mirror of the staff bathroom whenever her own mother had come home from a shift and had counted the coins on the counter twice, and had hidden the unpaid bill under the pillow, and had smiled at her daughter and said everything was fine. Emma was 4 years old, but she had already learned, the way poor children always learn, the difference between the fear of having done something wrong and the fear of not being able to save someone. She slipped out from under the thin blanket. Sophia did not stir. Emma stepped over her mother's shoes and pushed the door open only wide enough for her small body to pass. She walked barefoot along the servants' corridor. The tile was cold against her feet. The little silver cross swung against her collarbone with each step. She had made this walk in daytime 1,000 times. At night, the hallway seemed longer. She went up the servants' stairs. She came out on the 3rd floor and pressed herself into the shadow of a tall marble statue beside the smaller staircase. From that place, she could see straight down the long hall to the master bedroom door. She could see the 2 guards. She could also see, standing between them, a 3rd man in a long dark coat. The man in the coat was speaking to the guard on the left in a low, patient voice. He took a small brown bottle from an inner pocket and pressed it into the guard's palm. Then he pressed a folded stack of paper money on top of it. He kept his eyes on the guard's eyes the whole time, the way a man keeps his eyes on a dog he does not entirely trust. He lifted his face for 1 second toward the wall lamp. The light fell across it. Emma saw him. She saw the face she had seen 100 times at Signora Moretti's long dinner table. The face that had patted her head in passing on Christmas Eve and had given her a peppermint from a silver tin. The face her mother had told her, only that morning, not to trust with a single word. Uncle Ryan. And she understood, in the way a 4-year-old understands when danger knocks quietly against her small chest, that this was also the man she had seen in the back garden. This was the tall stranger in the hooded coat who had passed the envelopes to Vanessa. She had not seen his face there because the hood had hidden it. She saw it now. She pressed her hand over her own mouth. She took 1 careful step back. Ryan turned his head to the guard on the left and said something too low for her to hear. He pressed the little brown bottle further into the man's palm, closing the guard's fingers around it with his own. He nodded once and turned to go. Emma took another step backward. The silver cross around her neck swung out. It struck the corner of the marble base of the statue. It made a small, high, unmistakable sound. Ting. Ryan stopped. The guard stopped. Both men turned their heads toward the statue at the same time. Emma held her breath, but her small bare feet had already begun to tremble against the cold tile, and Ryan took 3 unhurried steps toward her hiding place. Emma ran. She ran down the 3rd floor corridor, her small bare feet striking the marble in quick, urgent beats, the same rhythm she had used the morning before, when she had run down the aisle of the great hall in her Sunday shoes, and had brought 200 guests to their feet with a single sentence. This time no one was watching. This time no one would clap. She turned left, then right. She reached the smaller spiral staircase at the far end of the wing and went down it 2 steps at a time, one small hand skipping along the polished banister. Behind her, Ryan followed with the unhurried stride of a man who had hunted his whole life. He did not run. He did not raise his voice. He walked in long, even steps, the way a wolf walks when it has already decided how the chase will end. At the T-junction of the second-floor hallway, Emma turned the corner too fast and slammed into someone's legs. Two strong hands caught her under the arms and lifted her before she could fall. Luca. He was making his second sweep of the interior security stations, the way Alessandro had ordered. He held her against his chest and felt the tremble that ran through her small body. He saw the little silver cross swinging against her collarbone. He saw the wide, terrified eyes. At the far end of the hall, Ryan came around the corner. He stopped when he saw Luca. For a fraction of a second, the corridor held all three of them in a stillness that was not silence but strategy. Then Ryan smiled. It was the friendly, easy smile of the family's consigliere, the smile Luca had trusted for 15 years across 10,000 dinners and 100 long nights. She wandered off. Luca, I was taking her back to Sofia. Children should not be running around the estate at this hour. It is not safe. Luca looked at him. He did not hand Emma over. He thanked Ryan in an ordinary voice. He inclined his head with ordinary politeness. Then he shifted the little girl higher against his shoulder and carried her past Ryan toward the main staircase. He said, as he passed, that he wanted to bring her down to Sofia himself. He said he had a few things he wanted to ask her mother about the kitchen inventory. He said it the way he said everything, evenly, with no weight behind any word. Ryan smiled and nodded. He said, of course. He said goodnight. When Luca's back was fully turned, the smile disappeared from Ryan's face for half a second. Only half. It came back before Luca had reached the top of the main staircase, but half a second had been enough. Somewhere behind him, in the marble hallway that had trusted him for 15 years, the ground had just moved. On the landing between floors, Luca stopped. He set Emma down on the wide step and knelt in front of her. The chandelier above them threw a pale, watery light across her face. She was shaking. It was not from the cold. He reached out and steadied her small shoulders. What did you see, Piccola? Emma looked at him for a long moment. She was 4 years old. She had already learned that some grown-ups could not be trusted with the truth. She had also been told, only that morning, that she was to speak only to Signora Moretti. But Luca was the man who bought her mother croissants at the corner bakery every Saturday morning. Luca was the man who had glued the broken leg back onto her cloth doll last Christmas Eve, without laughing at how ugly the glue had made it look. She decided. She leaned close to his ear and whispered, about the small brown bottle, about the guard at the master bedroom door, about the fact that Uncle Ryan was the same man in the long coat she had seen in the back garden, the man she had tried to tell the whole wedding hall about the day before. Luca rose slowly to his full height. He looked down at the child with an expression she had never before seen on a grown man's face. It was anger and it was fear at the same time. He knew he had just been handed the final piece. You have been very good, Piccola. Now I need you and your mother to hide in a place I am going to show you. You do not come out until I come back for you myself. Luca did not put Emma down again until he had woken Sofia. He did it gently. He crouched beside the cot in the staff room and shook Sofia's shoulder with the same care a man uses to steady an old horse. Get up. Do not turn on the light. Do not ask why. Bring only what your daughter needs. Sofia did not ask. She had lived 12 years inside this house. She knew that voice. She wrapped Emma into her arms without a word and followed Luca down the servants' stairs, through the back corridor, past the pantry, and down again into the subcellar under the wine racks. At the far wall, Luca pressed a series of tiles in an order Sofia did not try to memorize. A section of the wall gave way with a soft hydraulic hiss. Behind it was a small, windowless room with a cot, 2 chairs, a working sink, and a case of bottled water. It smelled of dry stone and cold air. You stay here, he said. You do not come out. Not for me. Not for Signor Moretti. Not for anyone whose face you cannot see through this door. Only for the code I told your daughter. Sofia nodded. She sat down on the cot and pulled Emma against her chest. Luca closed the panel from the outside. The soft hiss sealed them in. He ran back up 2 flights of stairs. He did not use the elevator. He did not use his phone. He entered Alessandro's study and closed the door behind him. He told him what Emma had seen. The brown bottle in the palm. The folded money. Ryan's face lifted for 1 second under the wall lamp. The confirmation that the tall stranger in the hooded coat had been Ryan all along. Alessandro said nothing for 30 seconds. Then he stood up. He walked to the wall behind his desk. He lifted down the framed portrait of his father, revealing the small square safe set into the plaster. He turned the wheel by feel, without looking at it. From inside, he lifted a Beretta with worn wooden grips. It had been his father's sidearm. In this house, it was never taken from the safe except when a betrayal had been confirmed under a Moretti roof. There was a knock at the door. Diego stepped in. His laptop was open in one hand. "Signore, I have it." The anonymous line. Alessandro turned. "Whose?" "Not Ryan's. Salvatore Bianchi." The name went through the room the way a cold draft goes through an unlit fireplace. Bianchi, the Bronx family. The oldest rival on the eastern seaboard. The man Alessandro's father had held at bay for 2 decades before the cancer had taken him. Alessandro's hand tightened on the Beretta. "Intercept the next call to her line. Immediately." He had barely finished the sentence when Diego's laptop chimed softly. The secondary phone in the drawer of Vanessa's dressing table, 3 floors above them, had begun to vibrate. Diego routed the audio to a low speaker on the desk. The voice that came through was male, deep, slow, carrying the faint softness of a boyhood spent in the hills above Palermo. "Tomorrow, any hour will do. Ryan will bring the boy to Warehouse 4 at Pier 14. You have 6 hours to do what we told you, the safe in Alessandro's study, and photographs of the 6 documents on the list I sent. If you fail, we bury your brother next to your parents in Greenwood Cemetery." Alessandro did not move. The boy, her parents, her brother. Greenwood Cemetery, Greenwood. He knew that cemetery because Ryan had driven him there 2 years earlier to lay lilies on the grave of a soldier who had fallen in a Bronx skirmish. Ryan knew the exact plot where Vanessa's parents lay. That knowledge did not belong to a man who had learned of Vanessa Hale on the day Alessandro had. That knowledge belonged to a man who had known her long before. A chain of thoughts opened inside him, quiet and terrible. Ryan had introduced Vanessa to him 2 years earlier, at Cardinal Bianchini's charity dinner. Ryan had arranged, without appearing to, the first 3 encounters that followed. Ryan had brought her into his life, not as a woman, as a long game, as a piece. His knuckles went white around his father's Beretta. He looked at Luca. His voice was cold as steel. "Bring Vanessa down here. Now. No one is to know. Not the cook, not the drivers. Above all, not Ryan. And the 2 guards at her door, both of them must be neutralized before she steps into that hallway." Luca went up the servants' staircase in front of Antonio and Bruno. Neither of the 2 old soldiers had asked a question when they had been woken from the barracks wing. They had only put on their jackets, checked the loads of their pistols, and followed. Antonio was 72 years old and had been buried beside Alessandro's father in every fight the old man had ever led. Bruno was younger by 15 years and moved as quietly as any man in the house. The 3 of them turned the corner of the 3rd-floor corridor at the same moment. The 2 guards outside the master bedroom door had time to lift their heads. They did not have time to lift their hands. Antonio drove the butt of his pistol across the left guard's temple in a single practiced arc. The man collapsed against the wall and slid down the wainscoting. Bruno was already behind the 2nd guard, a length of nylon cord looped between his fists. The man was on his knees, wrists bound behind his back, before he had understood which direction the danger had come from. The small brown bottle Ryan had pressed into his palm rolled out across the marble and stopped against the baseboard. Luca stepped over it and turned the key. Vanessa was sitting up on the edge of the bed. Her eyes were swollen. Her hair had come loose from its careful pins. The little silver pocket watch was clenched in both of her hands, pressed against her chest the way a woman presses a rosary before a firing squad. When she saw Luca in the doorway, she did not scream. She did not even flinch. She only closed her eyes for 1 second, and Luca understood that in that second she had believed she had reached the end. He kept his voice level. "The boss needs to see you. Things have changed." He did not explain. She did not ask. She stood up, tucked the watch into the folded silk at her waist, and followed him. She stepped into the study. Alessandro was standing behind the walnut desk. His father's Beretta lay across the wood in front of him. On the large monitor behind him, blown up to almost life-size, was a photograph of a thin young man, blindfolded, wrists bound in wire, a fresh bruise across his throat. Marco. Her knees gave out. She did not fall. She sank. Alessandro was around the desk before she reached the carpet, and he caught her under the elbows and lowered her the last inch himself. He knew. He had already known. She told him everything. She told it the way water breaks a dam, all at once. The abduction 3 weeks earlier, the call at 4 a.m, every meeting at the servants' gate, every envelope, the fingerprint on the Cayman transfer, taken from a release form she had thought was for a museum donation. Each new instruction had arrived with a fresh photograph, time-stamped, of her brother still breathing. She had obeyed to keep those photographs coming, she said, through the tears. "I did not tell you because I did not know who Ryan was. I thought the man holding Marco was outside this house. I did not know he lived under this roof with us. I did not know that every word I said to you, he could hear." Alessandro knelt in front of her. He had not knelt to another human being in 42 years of life. He knelt now. He took her by the shoulders and looked into her face. "You have carried this alone for 3 weeks. Forgive me for making you say it out loud." He lifted the little silver watch from the fold of her dress. He opened the lid. He looked at the 4 faces inside. 2 children, 2 parents, 1 Long Island summer that ended before either of them was old enough to keep it. He turned the watch over and read the engraving on the back. "Per sempre fratelli." He said it softly, in the Italian she had never spoken. "From tonight," he told her, "you are also a Moretti, and Marco is also my brother." She fell forward against his chest and wept, not from pain now, but from the weight of 3 weeks finally set down. Beyond the tall windows of the study, the night mist had begun to settle over the half-dismantled garden, and the last white rose petals were rolling loose across the lawn. He lifted her onto the leather armchair. He told Antonio to take his post outside the study door. He told Luca, "Get Diego. Start the trace on Marco. I need to know where the boy is inside 4 hours." But Ryan, who had been waiting for a signal from 2 guards on the 3rd floor and had not received it, already knew that something in the house had gone wrong. At 4:20 in the morning, a black car with its headlights extinguished slipped through the west service gate of the Moretti estate, and the man in the passenger seat did not look back. 4:30 in the morning, the report reached Alessandro through the internal line while he was still at his desk. Ryan had vanished. His phone had been powered off and, by the location trace, dumped somewhere along the West Side Highway. His personal sedan had cleared the west service gate at 4:20 exactly, 10 minutes before anyone had thought to check on him. 3 of the family safes had already been opened. The combinations were the highest tier, the ones Alessandro had never changed in 15 years, because he had trusted the man who had installed them. $2 million in cash was gone. So were the 3 most sensitive ledgers in the family: the list of paid public officials, the list of capos and their territories, and the list of protected witnesses. Alessandro did not raise his voice. He did not strike the desk. He simply sat down and picked up the internal line and called Luca in. Half an hour later, 7 men gathered in the underground chamber below the wine cellar. It was the room his father had built after the War of 1978, walls lined with lead and Sicilian oak, a single, long table, no windows, no way in that was not watched. The 7 capos who sat around that table were the ones who had walked into this life beside the old man. 3 of them were the men Ryan had believed he had bought 2 years ago. Alessandro had let Ryan believe it. His father had taught him that the traitor most dangerous to himself is the one who thinks he has already won. He laid the evidence across the oak. The still frame of Emma's hallway, the intercepted call from Salvatore Bianchi, the bank trail Diego had assembled in the last 2 hours, showing the quiet, disciplined flow of Moretti money into Bianchi accounts across 24 months, always in amounts small enough to look like ordinary settlement, always signed by Ryan's own hand. The 7 men said nothing. In their world, the treason of a consigliere was the worst kind of wound a house could take. He knew every secret. He knew every door. He knew every weakness. Alessandro let the silence sit for a moment. Then he spoke. "Bianchi is going to strike. Not this week, tonight, or tomorrow night. Ryan knows he has been exposed, and his only chance is to push Bianchi into the field before we can move first. Prepare 3 fronts: the estate, both piers, the casinos in Atlantic City, 2 of our best soldiers on every warehouse floor. No one comes in or out except a capo." The 7 nodded. Antonio rose. He was the oldest man in the room, 72 years old, his shoulders still square inside his old wool coat. He set his hand on Alessandro's shoulder. He spoke in the Sicilian dialect none of them had used at a formal table in 20 years. "Your father taught us that when the family is betrayed, we do not count the fingers we have lost. We count the fingers we still have. We still have 7 fingers, my boy, and 7 will be enough." Alessandro nodded once. He handed Sofia and Emma over to Luca, with the instruction to run them out to the Long Island safe house in a 4-car convoy along Route 25. A no highway, no direct route. Vanessa asked to remain. He refused her. She had already spent everything a woman had to spend in a single week. She stood in front of him and closed her fingers around his hand and said only, "Promise me one thing. Save Marco. Save my brother." Alessandro nodded, and he leaned down and pressed his lips to her forehead in the same way he had pressed them there in the great hall. In the moment before the whole world had come apart around them, she was walked out to the second car with Sofia and Emma at 4:50. The convoy cleared the front gate at 4:55. At 5:10 in the morning, the first report came in over the encrypted radio in the war room. Warehouse 4 at Pier 14, the warehouse where Ryan had promised to deliver Marco, was on fire. The flames were already 30 meters high, and there was no fire brigade responding. Salvatore Bianchi had understood, the moment his line to Vanessa's phone had gone dead in the middle of the night, that Ryan had been exposed. He had not needed a report to confirm it. Men in his world lived by the small hesitations of a silence, and this silence had told him everything. He gave the order at 4:55 in the morning, the same minute the Moretti convoy was clearing the front gate. Within 4 hours, every visible interest of the Moretti family on the eastern seaboard came under attack at once. In Atlantic City, a 5-man team walked into the Adriatica casino at the change of shift, cracked the floor safe with a portable rig, and left with $200,000 in unmarked bills. Both piers were set on fire before dawn. 3 warehouses along the Brooklyn waterfront were taken by armed teams who moved with the discipline of men who had studied the shift rotations for months. 6 Moretti soldiers were shot dead where they stood. In a private suite of a small hotel in the Bronx, Ryan raised a glass of red wine and touched it against Salvatore Bianchi's glass. Bianchi promised him, in the low voice of a man who had waited 20 years to say it, that when the Moretti Empire fell, the seat at the head of the eastern table would be Ryan's. Ryan smiled. It was not the friendly smile of a consigliere. It was the smile of a man who had spent 15 years pretending to be the closest thing his boss had to a brother, and who had finally reached the hour he had rehearsed in the dark. Between them on the low table lay a hand-drawn schematic of the Moretti estate. Every service entrance, every camera arc, every rotation of the guard, the 6 hidden rooms, drawn in red ink, that no one outside the family had ever been permitted to know. 15 years of standing at Alessandro's right shoulder, distilled onto a single sheet of paper. Beside the schematic lay a second sheet, the list of the 6 Moretti capos Ryan believed he had bought over the last 2 years. Bianchi laughed once, softly. With this list, my friend, the estate is ours in 30 minutes. Ryan drained his glass and nodded. In the underground chamber below the Moretti wine cellar, Alessandro was already 3 moves ahead of them. He had known, from the moment Ryan had left through the west gate, exactly which list Ryan would trust. It was the list Ryan had built himself, and men like Ryan always trusted their own work more than they trusted anything else. What Ryan did not know was that 4 of the 6 capos on that list had never actually been bought. They had walked in to see Alessandro 2 years earlier and had told him, one by one, of every envelope Ryan had passed them. They had continued to accept the envelopes on Alessandro's own instruction, so that Ryan would never suspect that his private map was a map Alessandro had drawn himself. His father's second lesson had been the one that carried the family through this hour. The best trader always thinks he is running the board. Let him think it, until you are the piece he has failed to see. Alessandro reorganized his men before sunrise. He split the family into 3 arms. The first, under Antonio, would hold the estate itself. The second, under Bruno, would retake the burning piers and the seized warehouses. The third, a small, quiet team of only 5, Alessandro himself, Luca, and 3 of the family's most experienced soldiers would go for Marco. He called Diego on the private line. Find me the exact address where the boy is being held. Warehouse 4 was a decoy. I need it in 4 hours. Diego did not answer. He only began to type. He typed for 3 hours without lifting his head. He ran signal fragments through 3 different intercept programs. He cross-referenced Bianchi property holdings on the outer boroughs. At last, at 8 in the morning, he found what he was looking for. An abandoned freight warehouse near the Verrazzano Bridge, on land held under a shell corporation registered to a Bianchi cousin, had been emitting a weak, intermittent cell phone signal Marco Hale's registered number inside a window of the last 7 hours. Midnight of the following day. The war Alessandro had promised his men came at last, and it came on 3 fronts at once. Antonio held the estate. The 4 rings of defense his father had laid down 40 years earlier held exactly as the old man had built them to hold. Twice, columns of Bianchi soldiers moved on the front gate. Twice, the 4 capos Ryan had believed he owned stepped out of the shadow behind the wall and cut them down before they had crossed the second cattle guard. Bruno drove north to the burning piers with 2 truckloads of men, and by 3 in the morning both docks had been retaken. 3 warehouses along the Brooklyn waterfront were back under the family flag before dawn. In the private suite of a hotel in the Bronx, Salvatore Bianchi lifted his 3rd glass of red wine, and for the first time that night he did not smile as he set it down. Meanwhile, 20 miles to the east, the Moretti convoy that carried Vanessa, Sofia, and Emma was moving in the second lane of an old 2-lane road, exactly as Luca had ordered, avoiding every highway. It never reached the Long Island safe house. 6 Bianchi gunmen ambushed the convoy at an empty crossroads outside Queens Village. They came out of a stand of oaks with automatic weapons already up. The 4 soldiers of the escort held the line for perhaps 90 seconds, buying the women the only currency they had left to spend. Vanessa knew each of their names. She had eaten at the family tables of 3 of them in the last year. The lead car went off the road first. Her own car, second in line, took a burst across the driver's window and rolled onto its side in the wet grass. She crawled out through the shattered rear window with a cut across her forehead. She dragged Sophia through the same opening. She lifted Emma up over the ripped seat and into her mother's arms. The 3 of them ran. The rain had thickened into a slow, patient drizzle. They crossed a shallow ditch and came up onto the road behind an old white clapboard church set back among oak trees. St. Anthony's. Vanessa knew it. Her father, when she had been a girl, had walked her here every Sunday of the last summer of his life. She had not been back inside its doors in 19 years. The front door was unlocked in the old Catholic way that trusted the small hours. The 3 of them slipped into the nave. They knelt beside a wooden pew at the base of the statue of the Blessed Mother. The votives at her feet flickered against the dark. In the shivering light, Emma reached up and lifted the silver cross from around her own neck. She held it out to Vanessa. Her small 4-year-old voice was still trembling. "You keep it. You need it more than me." Vanessa closed her hand around the cross. 2 tears fell onto the metal before she could stop them. She gathered Sophia and Emma into her arms and began to pray. She did not pray for herself. She prayed for Marco. She prayed for Alessandro. She prayed for the 4 men in the wet grass by the crossroads who had bought her escape with their lives. At the same hour, on the southern edge of Manhattan, a black car slid onto the on-ramp of the Belt Parkway with Alessandro at the wheel, Luca beside him, and 3 of the family's most experienced soldiers in the seats behind. Diego had confirmed it 40 minutes earlier. The weak intermittent signal of Marco Hale's phone had last pinged from an abandoned freight warehouse 2 blocks inland from the Verrazano Bridge. 2 kilometers out from the warehouse, Diego called back on the private line. "Signore, the signal has just gone dark. Either the phone has finally run out of battery, or the man holding him has found it and thrown it away. Either way, we have a window of 30 minutes at most before they move the boy." Alessandro pressed the accelerator to the floor. Through the passenger side glass, the cold March mist was settling onto the shingle roof of St. Anthony's Church far to the north and somewhere very far away. The last gunfire of the battle for Pier 7 fell silent for good. 3 in the morning. The black car came to a stop with its headlights already dead, half a kilometer south of the abandoned freight warehouse. Alessandro stepped out first. Luca stepped out after him with a limp already forming from the long drive. The 3 soldiers checked their sidearms without a word. The mist off the harbor was thick enough to muffle sound, thick enough to swallow the outline of a running man from 20 paces. Alessandro split the team into 2 arms with 3 flat gestures of his hand. 2 of the soldiers, both men who had served under his father in the last Bronx skirmish, moved off toward the north end of the warehouse. He himself, Luca, and the 3rd soldier went in from the south. They took the 6 perimeter gunmen in silence, a knife across a throat behind a stack of pallets, a nylon cord around a windpipe behind a rusted forklift, a gloved hand across a mouth and a boot heel into the back of a knee. These were skills his father had begun to drill into him at 16, in a courtyard in the Sicilian hills where the old man had taught him that the loudest man was always the man who died first. Inside the warehouse, the air was colder than the air outside. It carried the flat, dead smell of poured concrete and long-shut steel. At the far end of the loading floor, a system of 3 iron doors had been welded shut and recut in sequence, the kind of jury-rigged cage a man built when he did not want a body found. Alessandro slid the last bolt back with the flat of his palm. Inside, on the bare concrete, lay Marco Hale. He was 19 years old. He had been thin the day he had walked into Columbia University 3 weeks earlier. He was thinner now. His wrists were bound with copper wire that had cut a slow, dark rust into the skin. His feet were bare. His lower lip had split down the middle from the cold and the days without water. He lifted his head. His eyes were dull with dehydration. In the small pool of light from Alessandro's flashlight, he saw the man standing above him, and something moved in his face. He had seen this face twice, in the small folded photograph his sister kept in the inside pocket of her wallet on the 2 Sunday afternoons she had come out to visit him at the dormitory. Marco whispered, and the sound came out of his throat like sand. "My sister. Is my sister all right?" It was the first question he had asked in 3 weeks. It was not a question for himself. It was a question for her. Alessandro understood, in that moment, why Vanessa had gone silent for 3 weeks. This boy was the whole of the family she had left in the world. He knelt and cut the copper wire with a folding knife. He slid one arm under Marco's shoulders and drew him up. He unbuttoned his own long wool coat and set it across the boy's shivering shoulders. "Your sister is waiting," he said. "Your sister is my wife. We are going home." Marco nodded. 2 tears cut a slow line down each hollow cheek. The 5 of them moved toward the loading door. They had almost reached it when the door slid open in front of them. Ryan stood in the opening. 10 gunmen fanned out behind him in a wide, unhurried arc. He held a black Glock at his side, and he was smiling. It was still the friendly smile of a consigliere, but this time the eyes above it were as cold as a frozen lake. "You are too confident, Alessandro. Did you think I could not see this move coming? I sat next to you for 15 years. I knew you would come here. I have been waiting." Alessandro said nothing. He stepped 1 pace backward and set his body in front of Marco. Luca and one of the soldiers dropped low behind a pair of steel columns. Their pistols came up in the same breath. Ryan did not see the 2 men who had gone in from the north. They were closing on his rear at that very moment, 60 seconds away from their firing position. But Ryan had a play of his own, and he lifted his left hand and made a small, quiet gesture that sent 3 of his gunmen slipping around toward the rear loading door. The air inside the warehouse tightened like a violin string a half-turn from breaking. Ryan lifted the Glock and centered the front sight on the space between Alessandro's eyes. "Goodbye, boss." The gun went off. But it was not Ryan who had pulled first. Luca, half-shielded behind the steel column, had squeezed the trigger a fraction of a second earlier. The 2 gunmen on Ryan's right went down in the same breath. The warehouse broke open into gunfire. The 2 soldiers who had come in from the north cleared the last 20 meters at a run and opened fire on Ryan's men from behind. 3 more gunmen fell before they had understood which direction the second front had come from. Alessandro pushed Marco down into the concrete and shielded him with his own body. He came up firing. He took 3 men in close quarters, one after the other, moving through them the way his father had taught him to move through a small room, always 1 step to the left, always through the shoulder. A bullet tore a hot line across his left shoulder. He did not stop. 2 of the loyal Moretti soldiers went down to hold the line for Marco. One of them was Antonio's own grandnephew. He fell into a stack of pallets with his eyes open, and did not close them again. Luca took a round through the meat of his thigh and slid down the column with a slow curse. His pistol did not fall. He kept firing. At last there were only 4 men left standing in the warehouse. Alessandro, Luca, propped against the column with his coat wrapped around his leg, Marco, crouched behind a broken wooden crate, and Ryan, backing slowly into the deeper shadow at the interior of the loading floor with 3 of his last gunmen falling into position around him. At that exact moment, the rear door of the warehouse hit the wall with a metal shutter and swung wide. Vanessa came through it running. She had left the shelter of St. Anthony's Church the instant Diego's voice had come through the small satellite phone Luca had pressed into Sophia's hands before the convoy had left. Diego had said only 1 sentence. "The boss is going in for your brother, near the Verrazzano." She had not thanked him. She had walked out into the wet dark and had flagged a night cab at the corner of the church parking lot. She had ridden it as far as her cash would take her. She had walked the last 2 kilometers under the drizzling rain. She had carried nothing with her except the little silver cross Emma had pressed into her palm, and the silver pocket watch tucked deep in the folded pocket of her coat. She stepped through the doorway and saw her brother lying on the concrete. She saw the dark stain across Alessandro's left shoulder. She began to run toward Marco, screaming his name. At the same instant, Ryan stepped out from the shadow behind a steel column, exactly 4 meters from Alessandro's turned back, and he squeezed the trigger of his Glock for the last time. The barrel was pointed at Alessandro's spine, at the exact place where the boss had bent low to lift Marco off the floor. Vanessa saw it. She did not think. She did not stop. She threw herself into the space between the muzzle and the man she loved. The bullet entered her below the left ribs. She went down. Alessandro turned in time to catch her under the shoulders and lower her the last inch to the concrete himself. The little silver pocket watch fell out of her coat pocket. It rolled across the floor and stopped exactly 1 meter from Marco's bare foot. Alessandro looked at her and could not speak. Marco crawled forward across the concrete and gathered his sister against his chest. His tears fell onto her coat and mixed with her blood. Vanessa smiled, very faintly. Her eyes went straight up to Alessandro's. They did not carry fear. They carried the peace of a woman who has finally been acquitted by an act, and not by a word. She whispered, "You still believe me, don't you?" Alessandro leaned down and pressed his lips to her forehead in exactly the same way he had pressed them there in the great hall. Only 2 mornings before, In the moment before the world had come apart around both of them, I never stopped believing. Somewhere in the deeper shadow, the two soldiers who had come in from the north were closing the last angle on Ryan's position. Alessandro laid her back very gently against the floor. Marco's shaking hands pressed the fold of Alessandro's coat over the wound. Alessandro rose to his full height. He did not rise quickly. He did not rise in fury. He rose slowly, the way a man opens the last lock on a door he has kept closed for a very long time. Alessandro reached under the flap of his jacket and drew his father's beretta. The old walnut grip fit his hand the way a rosary fits an old woman's palm. He crossed the loading floor without a word. He did not look at the fallen men on either side of him. He did not look at Marco pressing the coat against his sister's ribs. He looked only at the rear door of the warehouse, the one through which the last living traitor of the Moretti family was now trying to disappear. The two soldiers from the north had already brought down the last of Ryan's gunmen. Ryan was alone. He pushed through the rear door and out onto the narrow gravel bank of the East River. Outside, the mist had lifted just enough. A thin crescent moon lay along the water. The light on the current was silver and moving. Ryan turned at the water's edge. He lifted the Glock. The barrel wavered in his hand. For 15 years, he had stood at Alessandro's right shoulder. For 15 years, he had learned to shoot from the man who was walking toward him now, in the courtyard of the estate, and on the private range in the basement, and at the small country property where the family had trained its sons since before the Second War. He had never missed at 4 meters in 15 years. He did not miss because of skill. He missed because his hand would not do what his mind told it to. Alessandro did not waver. He stopped 6 paces from the water. The beretta stayed low against his thigh, unlifted. His voice, when it came, was very low and very calm. 15 years. You sat at my father's table for 15 years. My father saved you from a life sentence when you were 22 years old. My father gave you a room in his own house. My father gave you a name. I trusted you for 15 years. Ryan's face broke. Not into grief, into something older and uglier. You do not understand, he shouted, and the shout came out ragged along the river. I deserved this more than you. You only inherited because you were his son. I did 10 times the work you ever did. I brought in the money. I kept the peace. I did every filthy thing that could not be laid on the boss's own hands. Alessandro, did not let him finish the sentence. He lifted the beretta and fired once. A single round, between the eyebrows. Ryan went down on the gravel bank with the crescent moon still reflecting in his open eyes. His right hand was still closed around the Glock. He had failed to fire in time. Alessandro stood over the body of his former right hand for 3 seconds. He felt no victory. He felt only a cold, wide emptiness, the emptiness of losing someone he had trusted, whether that trust had been earned or stolen. At that same hour, 22 miles to the north, the last of the war was ending at the front gate of the Moretti estate. Antonio had led the 4 loyal capos out through the inner wall in a wide pincer, and Salvatore Bianchi, who had made the fatal old-world mistake of coming to the estate himself to see the fall, had been pressed against the stone gatepost he had come to claim. Bianchi lifted his pistol. Antonio put a single round through the base of his throat before the barrel could level. Bianchi fell against the wrought iron gate of the house he had never entered. The rest of Bianchi's men either broke or died where they stood. Bruno had already retaken the 3 warehouses along the Brooklyn waterfront. Both piers were back under family control. The 3 casinos in Atlantic City had been closed under the polite word of the compliance officers Alessandro had installed a decade earlier. In a single night, the Moretti Empire had been not merely saved but strengthened beyond anything the old man's ledger had ever seen. But Alessandro was not thinking about the empire. He walked back into the warehouse. He crossed the floor to Vanessa. Marco was still pressing the wool coat against the wound. Alessandro lifted her into his arms the way a father lifts a child who has fallen asleep in a strange place. He carried her out to the black car parked in the mist. Luca sat in the front seat, one arm useless in his lap, the other on the wheel. He drove without asking a question, foot to the floor, toward the family's private hospital in Manhattan. On the rear seat, Vanessa smiled very faintly in his arms. Before she slipped under, she whispered, in a voice already thinner than a breath, "You promised me to save Marco?" Alessandro bent his head over hers. For the first time in 20 years, he wept. 6 weeks later, Vanessa lay in the enormous bed in the master suite of the Moretti estate. The bullet had come out of her in a surgery that had run for 7 hours. The wound had closed. The stitches had dissolved. The color had begun to return to her cheeks in the slow, honest way that color returns after a body has been given back to itself. The doctor still said 3 more months. Alessandro had stopped counting months. He sat by her side every day. He did not take meetings. He turned everything over to Antonio and to Luca, who was walking again on a cane. He cooked chicken broth in the great kitchen of the estate from a recipe Sofia had taught him herself, standing over him in her housekeeper's apron in the first week after Vanessa had come home, her small hands guiding his the way a mother guides a son. He read to her from the small worn books she had loved as a girl, including the Italian copy of Il Piccolo Principe she had bought for herself at 16, only weeks before her parents had died. Marco moved into the estate. Alessandro had already re-enrolled him at Columbia University and had paid the tuition, the dormitory fees, and the book allowance for the 4 years ahead of him. The boy was 19. He had lost 10 kilos in the 3 weeks of the sub-basement, but he had begun to put them back on, one plate of Sofia's lasagna at a time. Emma came often. She was 4.5 now. On a Tuesday afternoon, she climbed onto the bed and pressed the little silver cross back into Vanessa's palm, polished to a soft shine, on a new silver chain. Vanessa lifted the chain over her own head and kissed the child on the forehead. That small girl had saved her whole life. Emma would not fully understand it for another 20 years, and perhaps not even then. On a late afternoon in May, the last spring light came through the tall windows of the master suite in long amber bars. Alessandro knelt beside the bed. He carried a plain gold band in his palm, the same band he had stopped short of placing on her finger 8 weeks earlier, at the altar of the estate hall. It had waited in the drawer of his nightstand every one of those 8 weeks. He spoke in the low voice that had never learned how to be flowery. I almost lost you because I trusted evidence more than I trusted you. I let you carry your brother alone for 3 weeks. I locked you inside our own rooms. I am sorry for all of it. I will spend the rest of my life not making that mistake again. Vanessa smiled. She reached out. Her hand was still thin, but it did not tremble. You saved my brother. You do not owe me an apology. You paid it in the bullet through your shoulder. He slid the ring onto her finger. It sat a little loose because of the weight she had lost, but it did not fall. Beyond the tall windows, the gardeners had begun to raise a new wedding arch above the same marble aisle. 3 months later, the garden of the Moretti estate was again heavy with white roses. The same arch, the same marble aisle, the same priest. But this time no one ran down the aisle screaming. This time Emma was the flower girl. She was 4.5 years old, in a pale blue dress, with the little silver cross swinging at her throat and a real smile on her mouth. Marco stood at Alessandro's side as best man, thin still, but no longer thin like a boy who had been kept in a cellar. Sofia sat in the first row, weeping into Luca's shoulder, the same Luca who for the last 6 months had been buying her croissants at the corner bakery every Saturday morning, and who now had begun to make her smile again. Antonio, 72 years old, sat in the third row wearing the same tie he had worn to the wedding of Alessandro's father 40 years earlier. The 7 loyal capos filled the 4th row. Each of them wore a small silver ribbon over the heart, in memory of the soldiers who had fallen the night the docks had burned. Vanessa walked down the aisle in a simpler white dress than the one she had worn the first time. The silver pocket watch hung from a chain around her neck like a medal from a war only she and one small girl had truly understood. Alessandro waited at the altar. When she reached him, he did not lift the ring right away. He leaned down and whispered against her ear, softly enough that only she could hear it. No screaming down the aisle this time. She laughed. Her tears caught the amber light. He slid the ring onto her finger, the ring that had waited 8 months. The whole garden rose to its feet. Emma ran up to the altar and wrapped her small arms around Vanessa's legs. Sometimes the truth arrives in a child's voice. Sometimes it arrives in a bullet. And sometimes the deepest truth of all arrives in the silence of a man who finally learns to trust the woman he loves more than the evidence in his own hands. This story reminds us that trust is not built on evidence alone. Evidence can be forged, cameras can be tampered with, and words can be twisted, but real love learns to listen beyond what it is shown. The bravest thing a man can do is believe in someone when the whole world tells him not to. And the bravest thing a woman can do is stay silent to protect the one she loves, even when that silence looks like guilt. Sometimes, the smallest voice in the room, a child's voice, is the only one telling the truth. Have you ever been misunderstood by someone you love? Have you ever had to stay silent to protect a family member, even when that silence made you look guilty? Tell us in the comments where you are watching from, your city, your country, and share your story. We read every comment, and every voice matters. If this story moved you, please give it a like. It truly helps our channel reach more hearts like yours. Subscribe if you have not yet, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. And share this video with someone who has been misjudged, someone who needs to be believed again. Thank you for spending this time with us. May your loved ones always believe you, May your silence always be understood, and may the truth always find its way home. Take care of yourself, take care of your family, and stay well.